Hey there, this is Christine Landl, and I am with my sister, my best friend, my business partner, Jennifer Ream, and we are so excited to be here on yet again another platform that we are creating and another chapter, another piece to our journey.
The Well Podcast. This is Jennifer Ream. So excited to be here with you guys. Our intention for this podcast is all about sharing our love for all things wellness, holistic wellness that is. And we are here to uplift, plant some seeds, and support you on your wellness journey. We've always loved being able to be out there with our community, sharing all the things that we learn. And as we grow and learn new things, we love to put them out there, and maybe they'll plant some seeds for you and help you along your journey. So here we are. Let's get started.
Hey. Welcome back. We have a special guest today that we're so happy to have back on our Well Podcast because she's been here before, like maybe a year ago. Our dear friend, Lauren Peabody, who's also a family therapist and local to us here in the Fenton area. And we're just so happy to have her back because conversations are always amazing with you.
And we had a lot of requests.
Yeah.
We did have some people that were like, that was so good. Have her back on. And we're like, oh, we will.
Always great conversations. We definitely want to bring up some new topics. I think the last time we talked a lot, if you haven't listened, go back and listen. It was when we were coming out of COVID days. And so we had a lot to talk about with children and parenting and all of that. But we want to dive deep into some adult issues today, or some adult topics. Actually, this has been brought up before too. And I think it's really fun and relevant for all of us who've been married a long time now. I'm going on 20 years. Jen's 8 years.
My second marriage.
My
second marriage is 8 now.
Yeah. And Lauren, how long have you been married?
We just celebrated our 15-year anniversary last week. Yeah.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
It's been something.
I agree. And so I think it's really a fun topic to talk about because we're all on different journeys with it, obviously. And to me, it's been a lot lately with the energy, the way that it is and intense and how we deal with it. And where you're at, how do you keep the spark going and how do you stay on the same page? And so I think that's really one of my most pressing questions. And we're just going to jump right into it all because that's why you're here, right?
Yes.
You want to hear it and you want to share it. So I think that's something that is so relevant to people right now is being on two different journeys, but yet staying on the same page. And so I would love to know some of your best practices, maybe from a personal level, but also from the therapeutic side of things, how to respect the other person's journey when, one, you want to control it. You want them to be on the same page as you. Like, hey, let's do this. And I mean, my husband could attest to the amount of podcasts I've sent him or the amount hey,
Did you read this book?
Going on this journey with me, right? This journey of self-discovery
Yes.
and, figuring out how we evolve and grow. And he's like, no, is there sports on that podcast? So I feel like that's a challenge for a lot of people in our world, especially as women. I know there's men on this too, but not many men are maybe as into it as women. But so what are some of your thoughts on that? And do you see this often? And
Yeah, I think this can open a huge can of worms from both personal and clinical. I think that I can't talk about relationships without just name dropping the Gottmans, who are kind of the world-renowned relationship experts. They can predict divorce with a 90% accuracy.
Wow.
Yes, after listening to a couple have a conflict. And so I think that kind of name dropping and then going off and just kind of talking about some of the things that they have found really important is a good place to start. So what they feel are some of the most important parts of a relationship are maintaining a friendship. And that requires you to have date nights. And I know this is all kind of silly stuff, but not. Yeah. I have 3 young kids. You both have kids. It's really easy to kind of let that spark go. They talk about building what they call love maps. And that is intentionally having conversations about, for example, dreams and hopes and aspirations, because they change over time. But then also, okay, what's stressing you out? What relative are you feeling close to? Kind of mundane, but also deep topics. And they have a way of communicating those needs weekly. They call it like the 6-hour, I think it's the 6-hour couples week. So really spending a lot of intentional time. And I think that when we're doing the hustle and bustle of dual working families, plus raising kids, plus dealing with friends and family, we can really miss out on, we kind of almost take advantage of our partner and we don't really spend that intentional time. So the building the friendship is kind of the fun, easy part. And then the hard part is the conflict. And I think as all of us feel we're in a space right now in our world where there's conflict everywhere. And we don't always do a very good job of managing it, communicating about it. And the Gottmans have found 4 different really kind of killers of relationships. And they are stonewalling. That's the first. And that's kind of when you feel in a conflict and you just shut down. So typically this is actually more men that do this. And so, for example, if you got into an argument with your partner and we'll just say the husband turns around and walks away. So that would be stonewalling. The other is contempt. And that is where you're having communication where you're kind of better than. That's where the control comes in. So, well, I can do this. I'm going to manage it. I got this. You go over there and just kind of be, yeah. I'm just going to send you all the information and then you just synthesize it. There's criticism and then there's defensiveness. So the Gottmans, I mean, for anyone who's interested in reading about them, they have amazing, amazing books. They just came out with another book. They have classes. My husband and I have actually been diving really deep into the Gottmans over the last few months and really years. But we're still at 50%, over 50% divorce rate right now. So you could look at that half glass full and half glass empty, but we have a lot of room for improvement. And it's going to require, I think, individuals doing a lot of self-reflection. So not only those like Gottman principles of what to do in the moment, but I think the biggest part of it then is going back and figuring out what from your childhood contributes to the patterns that you have. What are you bringing to the table? How are you seeing things? My husband and I get into this all the time. I'm having a completely different conversation than he is. And it's all based on where I came from. And it's all based on where he came from. And so we're having this conversation that's very surface, but it's so deep.
How do you meet in the middle for that too?
I think, so I'll give you an example of actually something that happened to us this weekend. It was about control, and I walked away from our conflict, and I just had this slam in my chest of feeling like I needed to explain to him why my need in that moment was so important for me. And I ended up saying, as a child, there were times where I felt very chaotic, and being able to control my environment meant that I felt safe. And in this situation, it's not about that I'm trying to control you or I'm trying to make a plan. It's that this control feels like safety to me. And he was completely compassionate and met that with, and the Gottmans actually call this when you kind of talk about the dream under a conflict, like what's your need under the conflict. That's a huge part of their whole process as well. So I think that when couples come to a point where they are continuously having the same battle over and over and over again, which is what we do. We just keep doing the same dance over and over and over again. It's important to do that self-reflection and find the dream or the need or the want under what the actual conversation is. And that can be really, really triggering and really hard.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot. I feel like lately, just the need to go within and figure out what that is.
And the self-reflection part. So this is where my question is coming in, because I feel like there's times when, in my experiences, I love self-reflection and I love that journey of doing that. And I feel like it's not always like the same. Like, I'm just going to be stereotypical. So I feel like men aren't as willing to do that self-reflection work, or they don't know how. Maybe that's really it. They don't know how or even where to begin, or what does that even look like? So
because they're also able to let things go so much faster that it doesn't matter in 5 minutes to them, like it does to us too. I think there's a lot of that.
Yeah. So it's like, so then I feel like you're on my side, you're left feeling like, well, I'm processing this and trying to figure it out, and from my own healing journey, but what are you doing? You know what I mean? And that's just, I'm just being completely honest and real about that. Like that's been my experience before. So it's like you're left feeling like, well, I want you to figure it out too. Where is your stuff coming from? You know, like, and so that we can meet and talk about it and like have those conversations.
You want to put that desire in them. That
Yeah,
might
you
not
want
be
them,
there.
Yeah, you want them
They've got, you have to desire, you have to like want to, like you said, you have to want to,
or even have the awareness that is why there is a conflict coming up, because you have this wounding that you need to work through, that you need to heal.
I think men are often, and again, this is kind of stereotyping, but I think men are put in a really precarious situation because at this, and I have done this myself. Women also have been cultured to want men to be strong. And so when men are vulnerable and appear maybe quote unquote weak, that also elicits a response from females too. So it's like, I want you to be vulnerable. I want you to self-reflect, but whoa.
Interesting.
Not that much.
So true.
Like
Interesting.
back it up a little bit. Like
So
get
true.
your shit together.
Yeah.
And that is, so we put men and boys in this position where, yes, open up, but only so much that makes me feel comfortable. Like do the work, but not so much that you're falling apart. Because women can fall apart and then we can self-reflect and pull ourselves back together, but men can't do that.
Such a great point. And we're seeing that on such a like a global, in so many different ways. We're seeing this play out. Yeah.
Well, I even just went through that exact same thing. I'm like, were you in my house? What's going on here? But that was exactly it. And it was to the point where like, all right, I can't do it anymore. Like there's a need for us to help pull them out of that. And so it's like, where is that line drawn? Because I had to draw it. I was like, kind of done with this. And so, and I think that part's difficult, but when you can communicate well and it is, if you create a safe space for communication, I think that's very helpful. But,
so let's go back to stonewalling for a second, because that one did spark a thought in me and kind of like reflection. So when you talk about that, how do you differentiate between stonewalling and somebody who needs to remove themselves, to gather themselves and be willing to come back, but it's going to take some time? Because for me,
I thought about you when she said that.
Yeah, I definitely would be somebody who would probably be a stonewaller, but it's simply out of my own, like, I'm not a good person to communicate in that moment when things are really high level or when the other person is super intense. Like that intensity is like shuts me right down. Like I have to remove myself, and they want to keep going, but I literally cannot. Like I literally have to be like, I can come back to this, but it might take me a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk. So at one level, and this would be a whole nother conversation, I would want to go down the path. If we were talking just about you, we would want to talk about your attachment style and where that came from and how that shows up. However, if we were just talking about in the present moment, there is absolutely a way that you can and should request a break when you are activated. So it's almost like the presence in the moment needs to speak to the activation of the past. So you have to be able to be present in that moment, which is really hard if your kind of
it's
top
hard.
has flipped already. But you can say to whomever the person is, your partner, I'm really struggling right now. I need a break. And there are a few things that you have to add. You have to say, this is the time we're going to come back. And then you have to follow that. So you have to provide a time. You couldn't say, I'll talk to you when I calm down.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And for both men and women, ideally it needs to be 30 minutes or more. And if at the end of 30 minutes you're still really activated and need to come back and say, okay, I need another hour, or it's 10 o'clock p.m., I need to wait until the morning, that's fine. Then the next thing that you have to do is you have to leave the situation and you cannot ruminate on it, which women tend to do, and men do too, but we leave and then we think of all the things and all the evidence that we're right and they're wrong. We come up with 10 things that we're gonna say when we go back. I mean, I do all of this too, so it's really hard not to do it, but you have to do something that calms you down, that takes you out of that activation, and then you have to show back up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because that's definitely been a journey for me before, where I would be a stonewaller for sure. But now I'm definitely more like, I can see as I've evolved and done, that more of that healing work, I'm able to I just need to get to a peaceful place so I can communicate in a peaceful way. Otherwise I can't. You're so there.
Right.
So it's I got to breathe. I got to get my shit together,
Well,
that kind of thing.
and I think one of the things that the Gottmans talk about a lot that maybe doesn't get as much almost like press is this defensiveness that of the four, they call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but of the four horsemen, defensiveness is one of them. And I don't know very many people who don't get defensive.
Right.
And their research has shown that even if you don't believe that your partner is right, you should still be able to. So, for example, if Brandon said to me, you really hurt my feelings when ... Even if I don't agree with what he's saying, I should still be able to say, I see how that can be true for you. I see it. I understand. I can also even name some evidence from the past where I did do that thing. And I find that in partnerships, we really sometimes almost care more about being right than meeting our person where they are.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on agreeing to disagree? Is that a good place to be in or not really?
I think so. I think the Gottmans, again, I know I keep referencing them, they talk about perpetual conflicts. And those are 70% of conflicts between couples are these things that are going to happen always because we're just different human beings. The easiest example is a person who is clean and tidy with someone who is kind of more messy, right? So if they keep having the same battle over and over again, eventually that's going to start to nick away. So in our conversation, it would be one of the partners is the one who is constantly striving to do this inner work. I'm constantly reading, I'm doing therapies, I'm going to workshops, I'm doing all the stuff. And then the other partner is kind of maybe more spontaneous, showing up, like, yeah, maybe I'll listen to one of the 7 podcasts my wife sends me. But ultimately, if we focus on trying to get that person to ... So whether that's the one person saying like, you're a little much, like slow down on your self-growth, or the other one saying, you really need to do some more work on yourself.
I'm sure both of our husbands are telling us to slow the fuck down.
So is mine.
Stop reading. Don't read anymore. No more reading for you.
But ultimately, there's beauty in that. And if we can come to the table with kind of like, oh, my husband is just kind of great how he is. Not really. I'm still going to send him all the podcasts, but I'm not going to be contemptuous about it. Well, I'm the one doing all this work. What are you doing?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really easy to get into that space. And it's easy to get into that space in our minds.
Yeah.
So sometimes it doesn't even have to come out of our mouth. I mean, women are notoriously kind of people pleasers. We say the thing. We're constantly scanning the environment and watching for emotional kind of cues. So we're really good at managing our emotional environment. But in our mind, we can just be ripping people to shreds.
Mm-hmm.
Very true.
Yeah. That's so good. And I think a lot of times it's just coming from a place of like, this is so interesting to me. Like, let's be able to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we kind of got far off on being able to do that.
Totally.
So it was like, okay, what can we talk? What are some things that we used to talk about that we love to do together? And so there was, I feel like that was coming from a place of like, gosh, our interests aren't quite the same anymore. So it's almost like an eye-opening thing to happen in a marriage where you do have to put some extra love and care into that relationship.
Yeah, that just brought up something for me. And I don't know if I'm opening up another can of worms, but I feel
we
like
to open those on this.
I feel like women also spend a lot of their 20s and then quite a bit of their 30s becoming what the world kind of wants them to be, and then into 30s and 40s. And I actually did not come up with this concept, but 30s and 40s, then kind of tearing that apart and being who we think we need to be. And then 40s, scrapping all of those things and just learning to be. And I think that in partnerships, when you have had 8-year, 20-year relationships, sometimes you showed up to the table as the person who was becoming who the world wanted you to be. So you were maybe a little more people-pleasy, and you weren't living in your own integrity, and you were doing things that maybe were fine, but weren't following your kind of inner
I love
path.
that you just said that. I mean,
That's so good.
That was so powerful, and with putting into words what I was kind of trying to like pull together, how I was feeling a few minutes ago about that exact thing, but I wasn't thinking about it chronologically, which made so much sense just now because I was thinking about it as like, I feel like we get to this point where we're peeling back the onion all the time. We talk about this on our podcast before, and just learning how to just be. And that's where I've been for so long now is just, but it's such a journey from your 20s, your 30s to 40s to get there.
Yes.
To that point where because I feel like once you are able to just be more in your being and just in that peaceful place, and you are just like so good with who you are and, where you're at, and you show up in your relationship in a little bit different way where you don't have as much like expectations or like, whatever, you do you, you know what I mean? Like I'm just doing me, you know what I mean? And we do things together, but you just kind of get to that place, I feel like, if you've been doing that all these years.
Yeah.
But
and that can be really shaky for if you've been in a relationship with someone since your 20s or your 30s, you are kind of showing up as a different being.
Yes. 100%.
And maybe not as willing to adapt or say yeses that you may have done 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You're
so
a different
good.
person.
Yeah.
You're such a different person.
Well, and I feel like you kind of are every decade anyways. When I look back on my life, it's like every decade. And I think, there's a lot of 30 somethings that listen to our podcast too. And then there's a lot of 40s and 50s and 60s. And I think that it's important to know that that's okay wherever you're at. And especially in your 30s, I feel like you are trying to find your purpose again. Like a lot of people are still having little ones at home and, but you are trying to figure out, and a lot of times you do take on the external world and figuring that out, like what you're supposed to be still. And then you kind of gradually in your late 30s, you're like, something's changing here. And then, you just,
because you're
your desires.
you're so in survival mode when you're a young mom, and then or building your career.
Yes.
You're just all in on all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
So you just push all those other things to
That's
a
a great point.
And then you get to that point where you're like, oh, but what about me? I'm really like, I feel like shit about myself. Like all these things start showing up. Either you gained weight or you just find that you're depressed or whatever it is because you just lost
your purpose
yourself along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
And finding our purpose. I mean, I think, I don't know what kind of proverb this is, but what we know is that we don't know. And kind of not having that knowing and being able to just sit in, I'm just going to be, and not having the control and not having the knowledge of exactly what's going to come next is really off-putting when you're trying to build a career and raise kids and manage 85
It goes against every
relationships.
cultural norm too. Like you're just, that's why we are so like we are in our 20s and 30s, because that's how we were conditioned to be. And so it's like you're undoing all that conditioning that you had.
Exactly. And for those in their 50s and 60s, statistically, you are happier. So that's pretty amazing too, that our culture also kind of downplays. I mean, we don't do a very good job. I don't even know how to say it, like respecting the aging process, but I can't flip and wait because statistically we are more happy as women and men.
So with that said, the stages of what a woman might be going through, the men, do you know much about that and the midlife crisis that they supposedly have? Like whenever, I don't know. I remember hearing that when we were kids, like, oh, had an affair, bought his Corvette, going through a midlife crisis. And I don't see that a ton now that we're like in it, but what does that look like for them in that moment? Like ours is, I guess, in comparison to what we go through.
Yeah. So there is some research about midlife crises, and they are not, so I'm going to not be able to regurgitate the statistics, but they are a thing. However, they are a thing. I want to say it's like maybe 2 out of 10 people will have in their midlife. So typically around late 40s, 50s, sometimes into the 60s. Men, however, where women start to get a little bit less emotional as they age, men start to get a little more emotional as they age. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you can imagine, like I can almost, this is actually kind of stereotypical, whereas the grandparents, the grandpa's kind of a little weepy and the grandma's a little bit more like stern and strong. And that shifted from when they were raising their own kids. So there is some data to support that men are probably, I mean, and actually I witnessed that in my own family as my grandfather aged. His self-reflection went up a lot, probably because he stopped being so concerned about what culture wanted of him.
Yeah, providing and all the other things that you're focused on.
And it could be too, just the fact that they are working for so long and they are providing for so long that it's finally this time in their life where they can do their self-reflection.
Yes.
They can connect the dots. They can be grateful for their life, and all of those things can bring up a lot of change and emotion. And
Yeah, there's I say that actually with couples in therapy quite a bit. The pressure on men is vast. I mean, to be able to provide for a family, and obviously there's lots and lots of working moms too, but from a cultural standpoint, that really rests on a man's shoulders, and that can be stifling.
my husband, Bobby, has said that to me before, just it's heavy. And when I sat back and thought about it, I'm like, oof, yeah, that's heavy.
It is heavy.
That's a big, heavy one to carry.
Yes. I mean, your family's livelihood is on the shoulders of what culture says is one person. And clearly most families are dual working families, but women just have a different relationship with that providing than males do.
Yeah. And we do it, I think many of us do it in so many other ways besides just that. And I think that's the difference too. Theirs is kind of in a bigger bucket with that, where ours are in so many different buckets.
Yes. Which is why statistically women are a little less happy than men. Because we are spread
multi-focused.
So thin. Mm-hmm.
Multi-focused, and they can kind of laser focus and be left to laser focus.
Lots of anxiety, a lot of depression. It's, women, humans. Humaning is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And to do it with integrity and to do it in the way that offers us peace is not really the way our world's designed, especially the United States.
Right. And I think that's part of our mission in our work that we do. It's like, how can we do that and evolve and grow with intention around it? And that's why we have so much desire to learn and to grow from that, because I do feel like, gosh, we should be able to do it all. Not all in as far as tasking, but like, let's live this life with such intention that we're here to grow, and we're also here to bring joy and have fun and love and enjoy our partner and all of that.
It brings up for me the whole conversation that we've had before about just we were intentionally brought into this society to be in a slave system. So it was intentional
from a societal standpoint.
From a societal standpoint, and the way the structures are in place is a slave system. You go to work, you pay an astronomical amount of taxes. You have to purchase a home. You have to pay for all these things. So you're set up in a system that makes you feel like you have to go and grind just to survive. And not only just survive, but then to even have a little bit of nice things in your life to enjoy. So that's where I think I go to the bigger picture of how I see us shifting into a new world and a new earth, is that eventually, hopefully generations down the line, that's not the system that our kids, our grandkids and great-grandkids are born into, where it is an opportunity for them to explore their gifts right off the bat and nurture that and grow up doing, and not feel so much like they have to earn this money to put a house over their head and to feed their children. Like, no, they just are able to live and be in community with others, where you are productive and motivated, but motivated in a different way. Motivated because you're excited to participate in society in a way that is fruitful and, fulfilling and all those things. So I digress, but it does bring up that thought in my head of, because
societal pressures,
just where we're going, and the conversations that we have a lot about is that's the new earth that we want to create. Yeah. It's a new way of being.
And I think it takes Martha Beck, who is a wonderful author. She talks about 1 degree turns, that you have to be able to make these little baby turns in order to. So for example, a 1 degree turn for me has been really being intentional about what I say yes to. So my old self was, and still is very present inside of me, is just a yes person. I want to show up. I want to do everything. I feel probably some internal value when I say yes, in a way that's probably maladaptive. But so I've really tried to sit and think about what my yeses mean. If I really feel it in my body, if it brings me a sense of peace, or if I have any sort of kind of clenching or just kind of a
tightness.
Like an intuitive no. Being a little bit more mindful on that. And that, I think, is how we can start to kind of shift that narrative in the world. It's also really hard, and we talked about this a little bit on our first podcast. It's really hard to do that with our kids, because we have to let go of that control, and we have to allow them to disappoint us rather than disappointing themselves, and how that can look can then reflect on us and how that feels. And I mean that.
Yeah, that's a whole thing
whole other thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, the kids thing.
Yeah.
They show us a lot.
They do. They do. I mean, the 5 people in our life that are closest to us are the ones that are going to
teach us the most.
Yeah. And hurt us the most.
Yep.
And that's
for sure.
I mean, teach, but then also you have to expect that pain, which we don't like pain very much as humans. We really try to run from that pain, and you have to sit in it. And that's awful.
So let's talk about sitting in it, because that's a really important topic that we've not dove into before, but it does reflect on some conversations Christina and I have had about doing the shadow work. And I think that is in relation to what you're talking about sitting in it and the juice that comes out. I mean, the growth and the amazing stuff that comes from actually doing that. But a lot of people don't know what that looks like for them. So can you
like
expand?
the how?
Yeah, like the how too. Mm-hmm. So I can think about things that I've done, but I would love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think first and foremost is space to do that.
Yeah.
And that is something, so space would really equate to time.
Yeah.
So putting aside time, and time is a really valuable resource, and it's something that a lot of people don't have extra time. So I know when I started kind of working on my pain, it required my kids to be in school because then I could take that time. So if you're a mom when all your kids are home, you just might not have that space to do it. But for me, what it has looked like is doing therapy, doing types of therapy that dredge up old trauma. One of the ones is called EMDR, and that is a type of therapy that stirs up all your garbage. And then being able to sit in it, meditation does it, prayer can do it, writing can do it. I mean, there's lots of different ways that I have found that can kind of start your process of bringing up your pain and then sitting in it. There's also a difference between sitting in it and then projecting it. Mm-hmm. So that's what I see that happen a lot.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
And sitting in it and staying in it, I think is another thing that a lot of people, people could go to therapy for 20 years and be still dealing with the same thing. Like, how do you sit with that? And like, do you set the intention? I'm here to heal this and feel it and move forward with it.
Yeah. Well, what EMDR is really good at is essentially, I don't need to go into all the details about it, but essentially you're bringing up kind of a story or a memory from your past, and you're sitting in that and you're literally feeling that pain in your body. Feeling whether it's tears, anxiety, stomach, you're sitting in that, and you keep repeating it over and over and over again until your anxiety, pain, whatever word you would put on it, starts to decrease. So you use like a 1 to 10. So the therapist would say, where are you at? And then you're going to start to go down. And then the next part of it is inserting a new story. So let's say, so for example, one of my themes that came up for my own work was everything is ruined. And that was a theme from my childhood. And so everything is ruined. Everything is ruined. And then throughout my process, and obviously that was a big story of my parents' divorce and et cetera. But through that, then I started to literally see all of these people and humans and things that came into my life that were actually quite resilient. So in that really hard time in my life, I also had this person and this person and this person step into me and step up for me. And so I was able to really shift the narrative of a really painful part of my past into something where I saw it as growth and resilience and support and nurture. And what that does in your brain is it really shifts that narrative.
Shifts the perspective.
Yeah. And so now when I'm having these moments of my own fight, flight, freeze, submit, attach, it's different. It feels different because I'm not necessarily falling back into that abandonment narrative.
Yeah, you're rewiring too.
Yes, so much.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think too important, I think it's like you said, the time thing, but what I have found is if you actually can sit in it when it is triggered, man, that's where some good stuff happens. Because what I've learned in the last year is that when you are triggered and you can go sit in it and attach a feeling to it and describe it. Like, what does it look like? Where is it at? Are you feeling it in your shoulder? Are you feeling it in your gut? Usually it's the gut for me. Most women feel it in their gut. And you can say, oh, it's how big is it? and you stay and you feel it until you can breathe it completely out of yourself.
Yeah.
And so
naming it to tame it.
Naming it to tame it. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So I think there is so much to be said. Like if you can excuse yourself and go to the bathroom and take a couple minutes for yourself in those trigger moments, I think that can be so powerful. But if not, you're saying there's tools that can actually bring it up at another point in time when you're in a safe space where you feel secure to cry it out or whatever it is.
Yeah. But I do think, yes, what you're saying in the moment, dealing with things as they come, is really valuable, although really hard because you have to have that presence in the moment to realize the activation of the past. And then ideally you can breathe it out and pair it to some sort of theme that was from maybe your childhood, teenage years. I mean, our brain isn't developed till we're 25. So we have a lot of things happening all the way up through there.
I have to journal it out, like to connect the dots. And I'll always ask my inner voice, like, what is this connected to? And wait to see like a vision or a hear or feel or I get it. If I ask and I sit with it, I can get the tie back to where it was at.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fascinating because I'm like, oh, wow. I didn't realize when mom or dad said this to me that
imprinted you.
But because it was just didn't like seem like a huge deal, but then it clearly was.
Yes. And that's where meditation is so important. And that's where taking a break, if you're activated with your partner, sitting in pain with your partner, that is something that my husband and I have had to do a lot of this summer. And it was, I mean, it at times it felt like torture. And then also just adding to it, not drinking, not, using some sort of numbing technique that's going to kind of numb those feelings away. Not pretending like everything's okay, being okay with having things a little bit rocky. And a lot of us as parents try to pull it all together because we don't want to have our kids see us. And in reality, we know that kids need to see conflict. They need to see the rupture and then the repair. And then that's really healthy for them. But we try to put on this
everything's
mask.
Fine. Everything's fine.
It's not fine.
No, it's not fine.
Yeah. And I feel like it's so nice to hear for our listeners, for us to just talk about it together, that everyone's going through this with their partner, with their husband, wife, whatever. Like people go through the ebbs and flows of it. We all are here to support each other in our healing processes. And it's, there's times where you're like, can we get it back? Can we move forward? And I'm curious to see if you have statistics in that, just how often are people able to go from way over here and bring it back together? Does it just have to do with the amount of work that you need to put in and don't stop till you can get there?
Yeah. I mean, really statistically, despite the fact that 50% of couples are ending in divorce, the majority of people that have really big ruptures will be able to get through it. Like more than you would think, despite the fact that it's still 50%. We do know that right now, the time that most often divorces are happening are when kids are leaving the home. So it used to be when our parents were raising us, it used to be when kids went to school. And now it's when kids are empty nesters, really. And so
I could see that because I feel like there's even just people in our lives that we can think of that, our parents stuck around until I graduated from high school. Like they definitely did that. They stayed for us. And I think that there's probably examples we can all think of, people like, are they going to make it when their kids are gone? I think that I can see how that would be.
Yeah, it's this radical acceptance, but then also a radical drive to work at your most important relationship. And as mothers especially, I think we spend so much time pushing into our kids that sometimes our relationship with our partner is not always. I mean, the expectation of women right now from a mother standpoint is, I think, kind of insane.
Yeah.
So we put a lot into it, and we kind of let our I mean, it's not the job of just the female in the relationship, but we don't spend as much time working on it.
No, and I think it's because we are drawn to that place in our lives. Like I felt that way when they were younger and growing. Like I was just so invested in them because I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And that I felt like it was like the partner wasn't as important as that. It didn't feel that way.
Well, and you get you get so much physical love from your children too. Just like whether you're like constantly carrying them around in that affection or you're just snuggling and you as women, we get that emotional attachment to our children and we're fulfilled in that way. So there's that piece for people too, where you really have to put intention behind that to have that physical relationship with your partner.
You do. And so this is really interesting too. This is from an attachment framework that is not spoken about as much as, for example, the Gottman method is. But you are technically supposed to, in a relationship, move from your primary attachment figure being your mother or your primary caregiver, and that attachment is supposed to move to your partner. And we don't do that very much in our culture, and I think it's out of fear. It's really scary. It's really scary because your mother or your primary caregiver, that's kind of that unconditional love. And we've done a lot in our culture as women to really have that for our children. And then that's supposed to move to your partner, male or female. And as women and men, I think that's really scary. That unconditional love is kind of supposed to be there, but we've also then, marriage is a lot of work, but we also want to love our partner unconditionally. So there's this kind of both and balance there that we have to love them for who they are. And you need to work your asses off. So
interesting.
It's kind of a strange dichotomy.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. And I think I can see how some dynamics would play out if you're a child who has your needs met versus a child who doesn't have their needs met.
100%.
Wow. What kind of things that would bring up in whether you wanted to attach to somebody in your adulthood or you have your walls up.
Absolutely. And that's where, and I brought that up a little bit before, I think as an adult, knowing what your attachment type is really important because you can kind of overcorrect. So if you have an anxious or a avoidant attachment style, then you're going to need to overcorrect a little bit because the person who has an anxious attachment might be a little bit clingy. And if they're married to someone with an avoidant attachment type, which means kind of that wall, like I don't feel really comfortable in this really intimate space, their attachment styles are literally
like conflicting.
Yes, they're going toe to toe. And we're not even having a conversation about whatever we're talking about. Our attachment styles are talking and they are fighting because it's life or death in that moment.
Yeah, I can see that. I can think of lots of circumstances too. Very interesting. So how would someone figure out what their attachment style is? There like somewhere they can go for that kind of a resource?
Yeah, there's plenty of online questionnaires. There's lots of books. There's lots of workbooks, actually. There's a specific one even for couples. It's pretty easy to figure it out just by doing, like a 20 question deal. And I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt. There is also research to support that if you have a certain attachment style as a child, it is likely to continue into an adulthood, but you can change too.
Yeah, sure.
So this isn't a hard and fast rule.
Just bring some self-awareness to your relationship if you notice that kind of energy, because there's definitely something to that when somebody is very like all up in your business and you're like, there's this like this, and then you can see that play out in like in friendships with kids, like you can see kids play that scenario out even. So I think it's good to have the awareness of where you are at with that and what that looks like for you and how you can come and communicate it with your partner.
Well, sometimes for me, depending on where I'm at in whether it's cycle, where I'm at energetically, like it can be suffocating if someone's in my space. And literally that's the word I feel like, I feel like I'm suffocating right now. And it might be my husband, or because sometimes it's my kids even. I'm just like that's just how I feel. And and it's a really hard thing to communicate, but I have to communicate it.
Yeah.
It's like this boundary that has to be created. And
Yeah.
I feel like you said, I feel like kids, you see it with certain kids too. There's kids who are very hands-on-y and touchy. And there's kids who are like Robbie, I would say, was just like, give me my space, stay out of my space. Like he's kind of like me too. And even from an affection standpoint, like I don't need that as much, where my husband does need that. And so there's that
Yes.
battle.
It's in the same, I would say, under that same category. Yeah. So once you can, do that, figure that out, then it might help in those scenarios.
Yeah. And we're constantly reliving our old, what I see in therapy is that we will always be given an opportunity to continuously try to redo some sort of pattern of our past again and again and again until we are able to synthesize the information and do it differently. So we'll constantly have to rehash the same battles. And they usually come from childhood. Sometimes they actually come from generational trauma. So it's not even your battle.
Yeah.
You're battling. It could be your mother's or your grandmother's. Generally, it stays in the same gender. And if we don't dig into that, then we're just kind of blindly freaking out about things.
So in conclusion, like, what are you seeing are you seeing any overall themes collectively? We kind of talked about that when we last met, about, just coming out of COVID and the kids and how they were doing and what you were seeing in your practice. And is there anything that you're seeing collectively, like how we're shifting, or like are things coming up and with couples that are just seem to be like you can say there's a lot of this going on or a lot of that going on? Like, is there anything that sparks when you think about that?
I think you talked about kind of peeling back the onions, and I think we are seeking peace. And I think some of us are doing that in ways that are really adaptive and will produce some great results. And some of us are doing that in ways that are not as adaptive, whether that's falling into some sort of addiction pattern. And addiction, we can be addicted to self-help too. It doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. So, or control, we can be addicted to control. So I think that we're at this, almost like this edge, and we're trying to figure out how to jump, and people just don't really know how. I had a male come in recently and he's like, it's time. And that was it. Like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
What are we doing? And that's kind of the feeling that I'm getting. Like, okay, it's time. And people are ready to grow, and people are ready to change, and they're ready to find peace.
I love that, because I think Christine and I are seeing that exact same thing in our world too. And so that's why I asked it, because I was just curious to see, like, I feel like you, in your world and in your work, you can take a bird's eye view collectively of your, the people that you see and what your other therapists are seeing, and just the common themes and stuff. And it does help us to know where we're at, I think, because we're all shifting in such a big way now. So it does help us to look at that and go, okay, like, our people are ready. Like, we came out of a really challenging few years, but people are ready for peace. I love that you said that. And maybe that's going to bring on some more beingness and in families and in relationships, and less striving to do this or do that, and just more like being with each other and enjoying that, wherever that is, the simplest of things.
Yes.
So
And peace is very simple, but very difficult to attain.
And I think this will be so helpful. It's such a helpful conversation to anyone listening, just because they're able to now maybe articulate how they're feeling, not understanding where this bubbling up has been coming from or where they can put their focus on. I think that piece is really important. People don't know where to start sometimes, and don't know, they feel alone in where they're feeling and their relationship with themselves, or their relationship with their partner, with their children. So just knowing that so many people are out there on this, walking the same journey as far as growth and finding peace and just being, we're all kind of in that commonality of looking for the same thing. We all just want to feel joy, calm and peaceful and enjoy this life. And I think this will be such a helpful conversation for so many. So thank you.
Well, and I just want to add one thing. I think that I'm a therapist, so clearly therapy is really important to me. However, therapy is not the only way. There are many phenomenal teachers and I mean, whatever word you want to put in authors. So reading books, and then you mentioned journaling. I think reading and writing are probably the two most important things you can do, and finding your kind of soul speakers in books or poetry, and then putting yourself on paper, even before therapy, is really important.
Oh, I love that. I love that you said that, because I do feel that 100%. And
It's
I'm going
a
to add that to our favorites page on our new website has our favorite books. So we'll definitely add the Gottmans to that. Definitely going to be reading those and adding them too. But we do have a lot of books on there that do assist in this process for sure. So,
and your soul teachers don't have to always talk to you, and they don't have to be there.
Yes, so many of mine have come in very random ways.
Whatever's resonating with your soul in that moment, you know it's meant to be for you.
For sure.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So good. I love having you on.
I know.
Such an honor.
I want to do it
likewise.
again and again and again.
I know.
So we will.
Time is flying right now, so
I know.
we'll get on the calendar for 2023.
Yes. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah,
You're
thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we hope you loved this conversation as much as we did. We're so grateful for you, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks again, friends, for joining us today on our latest podcast episode. We love sharing this with you, so please share the love if you feel called to all your friends and family.
And don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on what we're going to talk about next. It's always so juicy.
And of course, you can find us on social, Instagram, Vibe Well Lifestyle, and Vibe Well on Facebook. Love y'all.
And if you're in town, make sure you stop by and see us at Vibe Well too.
Yeah, we would love to see your cute face.
See you soon.
Bye.